All right, so let's just take a quick look at this list. This gets to be quite interesting. As you see what's shown up, and this is just y'all telling us, sharing what you're dealing with day to day. So as you start to look at this list, and of course there are several that are common, many, many responsibilities. That could be in the family, that could be at work, that could be at home. For many of you who are big-time service people, wanting to save the world, poverty and pain and not enough time to serve and so on, all of those are also stressors. So, this idea that the weight of the world is hanging, big on our shoulders, we have to do something, and God, what would happen to the world if we didn't? So just keeping all of that in mind, narrowing down choices. So many options for some of us. For some, the opposite stressor may quite be true, that just not enough choices. And so you start to see certain commonalities of pattern, but more than anything else, if you just looked at this list and said, are these stressors coming in from the inside or from the outside? Just the direction of the stressor. What do you find for the most part? External, right? Almost all of them, even though some are personally driven. I need to achieve more, I need to do more, I need to serve more. But so they're in a way coming from inside. But if you think about it a bit, this need to be able to save something on the outside, that is still essentially an external stressor. And so, interesting. When we go into workshops and trainings and so on, this is typically a very common pattern. That most of us immediately identify are external stressors. They loom really large. Only once in a rare while, somebody will say something like, just calming down. Not being able to relax, not being able to calm down, not being able to get my mind to be a little bit still. How many of you can relate to those stressors? And so, just keeping that in mind, a lot of the stressors that come first to our minds is something on the outside. You go a little bit deeper, and you probably find that there are stressors that are on the inside. Now the question is quite simple. Can you really change or eliminate the external stressors? How much control do you have over your external stressors? Not much, right? If it's not one set of duties, it'll be another set of duties. If it isn't one set of co-workers or one set of family members or one set of relationships, it's going to be another. Right? And of course, this has been studied pretty carefully by people who've been looking at the behaviors, the habits, the qualities of highly effective people. And what they say is that about 10% or less of your life is determined by what happens to you, while 90% or more of your life, each one of our lives, is determined by how we respond. So let's just take a moment to think that through a little bit. Is that really true? How true could it be? You were so quick to identify all of these different stressors that are kind of pounding on you, and yet 90% of your life is determined by how you respond to the stress. That is an internal dimension. So take an example. Today, Puneet, as we're walking away, says, that was a lousy workshop. It's a total waste of my time. He says it in a second. And I start brooding over it. God, here I thought I was such, hot shit. And this is how he just sort of wiped out my entire workshop. What did it do to my self-esteem, to my ego? And so I brood as I walk along this beautiful garden, forgetting to see the flowers and all of that. I get to dining hall, I'm still fuming. My appetite's gone, my mood is off. People are noticing the scowl in my face. And then all through the afternoon, I'm still mulling that over. How could I do this better? Why was it so bad? It must be Puneet's problem. And so I build the story around something that was said in a second that I hold on to for minutes, for hours, for days, for weeks, for months, for years. I know people who hold resentment for decades. It destroys them. A father and a son that won't talk to each other because of something happened years ago. Can you relate to that? Something that happens to us in a moment, and we respond with a significantly longer time span. And so you start to mull over in your own life a few examples, and you start to see that there's probably quite a bit of truth to this so-called 1090 rule. The idea that about 10% of your life is determined by what is happening to you, and 90% by how you respond. And so if indeed you're going to focus your work on getting a handle on your life, being the most effective, much of this related to that, greater effectiveness, greater efficiency, then you should be focusing here, right? That's the obvious place to be. And what is that place? How do I respond? Right? How do I respond? For the most part, most of us are reacting. How often are we really acting? Acting with self-awareness, acting with self-mastery. That becomes a question. I'll draw a picture real quick. Most of you will be able to say what this model is about. What is this model of? The atom, right? The nucleus in the center, electrons swirling around. Right? So my question to you is, where is the power of the atom? Is it in the whirling electrons? Or is it in here? In that tiny little nucleus, where you know that if you smash that nucleus, a tremendous amount of energy is just waiting to be unleashed. Right? So let's think about this. What does this have to do with our practice? It's yoga and meditation and all that good stuff. And so let's just look at this a little bit. If this is I, the very core of your being, what could these be? These so-called electrons. Our five senses, right? So you've got your eyes, you see something, mind runs after it, and you have a reaction. I like it, I don't like it. I hear something, I like it, I don't like it. I want it, I don't want it. And this game goes on, right? So you've got your five senses that are like the whirling electrons that are basically taking you off the center, right? But the question again is, where is your real power? Is it out here in the world of the senses? Heck no. It's at your core. So let's start looking a little closer at the very core of our being. Neuroscientists who are looking at the brain, looking at the connections between brain and emotion, are basically saying we don't just have five senses, eyes, ears, the senses of smell and touch and so on and so forth. There are more. They're saying if this is your core, and you've got your five senses already pulling you out, there is a sixth layer. What is that? They're calling them bodily states. What are these? If you're scared, your heart starts to pound. That's not part of your five senses, but you can sense, you can feel your heart pounding. If you're really nervous, a big presentation, a big project's completion, you're a little bit nervous, butterflies in the tummy. Right? We can all relate to that. Those are physical, bodily sensations that are a little bit beyond our five senses. Make sense? So you've got these bodily states, but then what next? They're saying there's something more. So next what you have is what they're calling mental states. What are these? I'm sad. I'm happy. I'm anxious. I'm calm. I'm stressed. I'm relaxed. I'm distracted. I'm focused. So states of mind become kind of another layer. That's again not bodily states and not your five senses. Does this make sense? So you've got you've got these, the sixth and the seventh senses, it's kind of waiting around, a little bit more insight than these senses that are rushing outwards. So then, of course, you start thinking, what's next? As you become aware of your bodily and mental states, what is that called? Let's just call it self-awareness. What is the essence of self-awareness? It's the difference between being sad or being happy or being anxious or being calm or relaxed is a mental state. It's a feeling. And yet how often do we so identify with our feelings that we feel that that's us? When my leg hurts, I say my leg is hurting. And when I feel sad, I say I am sad. Yet you know that's just a part of you. Right? And so self-awareness systematically builds capability to move from the first to the second. Before you get too overwhelmed by the emotion, you say, this is a feeling. It is transient, just like all feelings. And I am the one feeling it. You establish a connection with the witness, you're a little closer to the core. Right? And you're able to perhaps separate these out a little bit. What happens if you start to get a little bit more established in self-awareness? Comes the next layer. Self-mastery. That is a systematic process. Self-mastery cannot come without self-awareness. And self-mastery, what is that? Just as self-awareness is the distinction between these two, self-mastery says, I act rather than react. So when Puneet does say something terrible about my workshop, I say, fine. You know, I take that for what it is and say, let's figure out how to make the next workshop a little bit better. Or, that's one person's opinion. And let it go with that. Becomes pretty much more powerful, right? I can let it go, let it drop off, and I move on. You're living much more in the present than being dictated by past or future. And that is the essence of self-mastery. And remembering that 1090 rule, that is, nudging you towards living your life more fully. Remember, this is coming from analysis of behaviors of highly effective people. Just about every one of you, from what you were saying about your biggest stressors, there were indications, hints, that you wanted to be more effective. These stressors were making you less effective. And now what happens, as you get established in self-mastery, you start to connect more systematically beyond the whirling five senses, the body and mind states, building self-awareness, self-mastery, you connect to your very essence. Who are you really? And of course, as you connect to that source, you're able, just like the atom, you're able to unleash the tremendous power and potential that is at the very core of your being. And this process of going in is the very essence of yoga. The meaning of the word, as you know, is to connect, to join, to yoke. What are we yoking to what? You have a sense of who you are. I'm my body, I'm my mind, I'm my titles, I'm my degrees, I'm my residential address, I'm my employer's peon. But that's just one part of it. There's something more that is us, that is profoundly powerful, which of course the Gita reminds us, that the essence in us, what fire cannot burn, what wind cannot dry, what sword cannot cleave. Those are the kinds of hints you're given. That infinite, immortal capability is residing at the core. That's who we really are. And so connecting to that is part of the process of yoga. But does it just end there? I get to be more effective. I get to be more efficient. I am more master of myself. I am acting more than reacting. So let's think about that for a moment. What happens if you've got two people connecting at the core? Not the whirling electrons and all of that, but really at the core. Just think for a moment. You are established in self-awareness and self-mastery. You are connecting to the sense of how amazingly powerful you are, and you're able to connect to another being at that level. Not at the superficial level, color of hair, color of skin, color of eye, none of that. They're little petty behaviors now and then. I like it, I don't like it, none of that. At the very essence. As the Upanishads remind us, love your child, not as your child, but there's the essence of the divine within. That kind of connecting, where you're connecting beyond all of their surface, good and not so good. What would this connection be made of? I suggest that this connection is nothing but love and compassion, it is nothing but love and compassion, gratitude and forgiveness, empathy and selfless service. And that, of course, is the other dimension of yoga. Connecting to our essence and connecting to the essence of the other. Where the love becomes a little bit more unconditional, where the service becomes a little more selfless, where there is more gratitude than expectation, where there is more forgiveness than blame. What would the world be like if most of us could act with self-awareness and self-mastery most of the time? So just imagine a community of people. All of these are the little eyes, just connecting to each other at that level. What would that community look like? How magical it would be, how amazing it would be, where most of us are acting with love and compassion and gratitude and forgiveness and empathy and selfless service most of the time. That's the dream. That's the vision. That's the power and the potential of the practice of yoga. Questions? Have I put you all to sleep? And so then you say, all right, so how do we implement all of this? How do we really provide a systematic approach to the practice? Because we've created a situation where either, and even in the country where it was born, or countries across the world, we've either reduced it into a fitness fad, or we've turned it into something that's culturally incongruent or socially elite. You have to go to a fancy, swanky yoga studio and cough up some real money to be able to take an hour-long class. And then you come out feeling so great. What does that have to do with changing the world? With this. And so the idea that if a practice is so universal, that anyone can practice yoga anytime, anywhere, how do we make it happen? And so as an example, this is what Niroga did. Niroga Institute, a little nonprofit in the San Francisco Bay Area. We basically took the essence of Raja Yoga, which is anchoring in mindfulness, connecting with your breath, you emerge in movement. And all of a sudden, a few moments of this amazingly powerful because it's an exercise in moving meditation, in mindfulness and motion. And it's a systematic way to gradually cut through the five senses in the body and mind states to that, nudging towards your very core, your very essence, so that you can act with self-awareness and self-mastery. And so we're basically taking these practices, you'll get a taste of it in a moment, and taking into settings where people normally have had no exposure to this. Going into schools, juvenile halls, jails, cancer hospitals, senior centers, by the thousands each week. We've basically been targeting 3 domains of social function. And of course, with the connection with, the Ganga Action Parivar and so on and so forth, I'll give you just a sense of a simple matrix. Education, healthcare, violence prevention or public safety, and global sustainability. How are we targeting these? Again, very systematically. 4 approaches. Creating this matrix for systematically applying a transformative practice for social change. One is direct service. And so training the teachers to go out into the community and teach. Right now we teach about 100 classes a week in about 40 different sites, serving a couple thousand people a week, all across the Bay Area, half a dozen counties. And so we're building systematic capability. Hundreds of teachers have been trained so that we know that there is a model that absolutely works, that's robust, that can be scaled, that can be replicated. The next approach is training. So we're training yoga teachers who understand the philosophy, who know the anatomy and the physiology, who know how to teach with the best capabilities available, some of the best teachers in the world, that kind of capability. Because if you are going to teach the most vulnerable, you have to be absolutely at the top of your game. Otherwise, you have no business teaching. Because God knows vulnerable communities have had enough flaky adults in their life. You don't need to be another one. And so, quality, reliability is key. And so this is very, very important to us, the trainings. But that's yoga teachers. But the yoga teacher is just the beginning of it, right? How to migrate from teacher to healer. So you have a whole year-long program to become a yoga teacher, and then from there, a second year where you're immersed in major physical systems and common chronic conditions. The third year where you're now looking at how to tie all of that together to take it to vulnerable populations, to special populations. And so a whole 3-year program to provide a trajectory to go from yoga teacher to healer. That's one part of it. The second piece is taking yoga teachers who are generally calibrated to teach in a studio and saying, you need to do something more to be able to go teach in settings where people aren't going to just sit quietly and focus and engage, where attention spans are minuscule, where they're going to spit back at you, even as you're trying to be as nice as possible to them. They're going to push every single button that you didn't even know you had. How can you teach there? Survive and even thrive. And so we do a 2-day training with certified yoga teachers, not only our teachers, but teachers from other traditions. And we say, all right, learn how to serve really challenging populations and take care of yourself at the same time. And the last training that we do, and that's a little bit of a sense of what you'll get here today. We typically do that as a 6-hour training. We're just giving you a little taste of it. It's basically saying, let's extract the essence of an hour-long yoga class into 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Still that same structure, anchored in mindfulness, connecting with your breath, emerging in movement. Often in schools, we call it the ABCs. Mindful action, mindful breathing, mindful centering. In fact, in many of these settings, in direct service, in jails and juvenile halls, we often don't even call it yoga because God knows there's so much confusion about what yoga is. It's the same over here. Most people think yoga is either associated with some Ayurvedic spa or it's again body beautiful yoga. And so to step back from that, how many of us really think about yoga as a significantly powerful transformative practice that has the potential to totally change us and change the world around us? Not at all common, right? It's just very much still at the level of asana. If you're lucky, you'll get a little pranayama. And yet asana is given totally short shrift by Patanjali, basically saying that it's just a way, asana and pranayama, to give you a little bit of control over your body and your mind so that the real journey can begin. Pratyahara and dharana and dhyana, that journey inwards, introspection, deepening into concentration, deepening into meditation, that hopefully leads to self-realization. That's the practice. Just preparing you to engage in the inner journey, and yet most of our time and energy with yoga is spent on that peripheral stuff of asana and a little bit of pranayama. Any monkey will have greater flexibility than any of you will ever have. So it's not just about flexibility. I often say in class that, you know, the most advanced, most complicated, most esoteric pretzel pose, if you're going to do that with a scattered mind, it's elementary yoga. And yet the simplest of yoga poses, done with focus, done with attention, catapults that form into advanced yoga. And so Shavasana turns out to be the most challenging pose, right? Because it's not about just stilling your body. The real challenge in Shavasana is getting your mind as still as your body. And that is a whole different challenge. Make sense? And so we often don't even call it yoga. We just call it another acronym. Actually, behavioral psychologists and such who've been working with us, when I proposed this name, they just lapped it up. They basically, I called it transformative life skills. I said it's a skill. Yoga, and especially the spirit of Raja Yoga, it's a skill. Just like doing asana is a skill. Playing a musical instrument is a skill. Coding a computer is a skill. But then, what makes a skill a life skill? Where all of a sudden, it's nudging you towards healthy behaviors, healthy lifestyle choices, perhaps. And then what makes a life skill? Transformative. Where it's now starting to give you those self-hyphenated words that are the very essence of the practice. And we touched upon a couple of those already. Self-awareness, self-mastery, self-control, self-confidence, all of that. And so, that is what we're really trying to get to. And so we call it transformative life skills. What else do we do? Research. We're engaged with some of the top people in the country, in the world, who are basically looking at the effects of our programs in these different settings for vulnerable populations and trying to identify what's happening. So far, what they found, preliminary results. They're very, very excited. They're starting to write papers. They're basically showing that we can lower stress. And we can increase self-control or emotion regulation. So we were just talking about your biggest stressors, right? We know that those stresses aren't going to go away in some form or other. If it's not one stress, it's going to be another. But you can change your perception of stress, perceived stress, because that's something you can change. That's that part about reacting. And so if you can actually change your perception of stress, you're way ahead of the game. And if you can increase self-control, self-awareness, self-reliance, that is values-based education at the very essence. That's basically saying, yes, you have a little bit more self-mastery, and that will affect not only you, but everybody else around you. And finally, policy and advocacy is something we're just starting to get into. That this is not about some foo-foo little practice that gives you a little calming and relaxing. That this is profoundly important in trying to tackle the significant challenges in all of these areas. Give you one example. A few days ago, one of the people in Ganga Action Parivar sent out an email about eco-toilets. This was Dipin, just before he left. And the email was about corruption within a public agency, as well as non-profits that have committed to put down thousands and thousands and thousands of eco-toilets in a bunch of districts. The project was 240 crores. It's a massive amount of money just to do eco-toilets. And a very quick inspection showed that at least 10% of this money was just getting stolen off the top. 24 crores. In a country where most of the people, in fact, a huge percentage of people are living on less than $1 a day, do you know what the math shows for 24 crores? 10,000 families could be fed for a year. In yesterday's newspaper, and this is not just India. We know India has tons of corruption, but so does the rest of the world. The people, the organizing committee of the Olympics and the World Cup soccer folks, the president was being challenged that why there's such tremendous corruption in the contracts that get signed with the top dogs at the World Cup and with the Olympics. There's a little bit of scrutiny. Apparently, the last head of the of FIFA, the World Cup organization, had taken bribes in the amount of millions of dollars. And the present head knew about it. And so he was being challenged. That if you knew it, he was general secretary, but the president technically got the bribe. Everybody was in it. And he said, well, in those days, and this was 1997, he said, in those days, it was perfectly okay. It was legal. In fact, the people who gave those bribes wrote it off as commission, and they got a tax deduction. What is wrong with that? When you see, we spent half a day cleaning up garbage in a corner, going through, right in a corner outside of Parmarth. 30 bags of garbage was filled up, cleaned up, ready to just create a little demonstration plot where a bunch of trees could get planted. You look at it today, it's significantly worse than before we cleaned it up. And so, the challenges are non-trivial. If you are really going to go towards global sustainability, it's not about punishing industries. It's not about punishing governments, punishing world leaders. It's not about educating the population. The essence here, on top of all of the external things that we have to do, one of the key things here, if you're really going to get the Ganga to be not polluted, to save our rivers across the world, the challenge here is to deeply feel that we're interconnected, that we're interdependent. Because if we don't feel that, we will pollute with impunity. It's just that simple. Does this make sense to you all?